Oh, just moving my mic. Bear with me for a moment. Okay, that's a good spot. All right, hello. We're here. Thanks for bearing with me this week while I dealt with a head cold. I'm going to go ahead and get started in like a minute and a minute and a half maybe. And we'll probably just read chapter 20 today, but then we'll be back on Monday with more. All right, hang tight. Just a quick level test. Looks good. All right. Wait another 30 seconds, and we'll get started. Maybe a little bit more than that. Sometimes I get started and someone shows up like 5 minutes in, and I always feel a little bit bad. All right. Let's get down to it. Chapter 20. From the lectern in the refectory, the reader was intoning the announcements. Candlelight blanched the faces of the robed legions who stood motionless behind their stools and waited for the beginning of the evening meal. The reader's voice echoed hollowly in the high-vaulted dining room whose ceiling was lost in brooding shadows above the pools of candle glow that spotted the wooden tables. "The Reverend Father Abbot has commanded me to announce," called the reader, "that the rule of abstinence for today is dispensed at tonight's meal. We shall have guests, as you may have heard. All religious may partake of tonight's banquet in honor of Thontadio and his group. You may eat meat. Conversation, if you'll keep it quiet, will be permitted during the meal." Suppressed vocal noises, not unlike strangled cheers, came from the ranks of the novices. The tables were set. Food had not yet made an appearance, but large dining trays replaced the usual mush bowls, kindling appetites with hints of a feast. The familiar milk jugs stayed in the pantry, their places taken for tonight by the best wine cups. Roses were scattered along the boards. The abbot stopped in the corridor to wait for the reader to finish reading. He glanced at the table set for himself, Father Galt, the honored guest, and his party. Bad arithmetic again in the kitchen, he thought. 8 places had been set. 3 officers, the Thon and his assistant, and the 2 priests made 7, unless, in some unlikely case, Father Galt had asked Brother Cornhor to sit with them. The reader concluded the announcements, and Dom Paulo entered the hall. "Flectamis genua," intoned the reader. The robed legions genuflected with military precision as the abbot blessed his flock. "Levate." The legions rose. Dom Paulo took his place at the special table and glanced back toward the entrance. Galt should be bringing the others. Previously, their meals had been served in the guest house rather than the refectory to avoid subjecting them to the austerity of the monk's own frugal fare. When the guests came, he looked around for Brother Cornhor, but the monk was not with them. "Why the 8th place setting?" he murmured to Father Galt when they had taken their places. Galt looked blank and shrugged. The scholar filled the place on the abbot's right, and the others fell in towards the foot of the table, leaving the place on his left empty. He turned to beckon Cornhor to join them, but the reader began intoning the preface before he could catch the monk's eye. Oremus, answered the abbot, and the legions bowed. During the blessing, someone slipped quietly into the seat on the abbot's left. The abbot frowned, but did not look up to identify the culprit during the prayer. Et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Sedete, called the reader, and the ranks began seating themselves. The abbot glanced sharply at the figure on his left. Poet! The bruised lily bowed extravagantly and smiled. Good evening, sires, learned Thon, distinguished hosts, he orated. What are we having tonight? Roast fish and honeycombs in honor of the temporal resurrection that's upon us? Or have you, my lord abbot, finally cooked the goose of the mayor of the village? I would like to cook. Ah, quoth the poet, and turned affably toward the scholar. Such culinary excellence one enjoys in this place, Thontadio. You should join us more often. I suppose they are feeding you nothing but roast pheasant and unimaginative beef in the guest house. A shame. Here one fares better. I do hope brother chef has his usual gusto tonight, his inward flame, his enchanted touch. Ah! The poet rubbed his hands and smirked hungrily. Perhaps we shall have his inspired mock pork with maize a la Friar John, eh? Sounds interesting, said the scholar. What is it? A greasy armadillo with parched corn, boiled in donkey milk. A regular Sunday special. Poet, snapped the abbot. Then, to the Thon, I apologize for his presence. He wasn't invited. The scholar surveyed the poet with detached amusement. My lord Hannigan, too, keeps several court fools, he told Paulo. I am familiar with the species. You needn't apologize for him. The poet sprang up from his stool and bowed deeply before the Thon. Allow me instead to apologize for the abbot, sire, he cried with feeling. He held the bow for a moment. They waited for him to finish his foolishness. Instead, he shrugged suddenly, sat down, and speared a smoking fowl from the platter deposited before them by a postulant. He tore off a leg and bit into it with gusto. They watched him with puzzlement. I suppose you're right in not accepting my apology for him, he said to the Thon at last. The scholar reddened slightly. Before I throw you out, worm, said Galt, let's probe the depths of this iniquity. The poet waggled his head and munched thoughtfully. It's pretty deep, all right, he admitted. Someday Galt is going to strangle himself on that foot of his, thought Dom Paulo. But the younger priest was visibly annoyed and sought to draw the incident out ad absurdum in order to find grounds for quashing the fool. Apologize at length for your host, poet, he commanded, and explain yourself as you go. Drop it, father, drop it, Paulo said hastily. The poet smiled graciously at the abbot. That's all right, my lord, he said. I don't mind apologizing for you in the least. You apologize for me, I apologize for you, and isn't that a fitting maneuver in charity and goodwill? And nobody need apologize for himself, which is always so humiliating. Using my system, however, everyone gets apologized for, and nobody has to do his own apologizing. Only the officers seemed to find the poet's remarks amusing. Apparently the expectation of humor was enough to produce the illusion of humor, and the comedian could elicit laughter with gesture and expression, regardless of what he said. Thontadio wore a dry smirk, but it was the kind of look a man might give a clumsy performance by a trained animal. And so, the poet was continuing, if you would but allow me to serve as your humble helper, my lord, you would never have to eat your own crow. As your apologetic advocate, for example, I might be delegated by you to offer contrition to important guests for the existence of bedbugs, and to bedbugs for the abrupt change of fare." The abbot glowered and resisted an impulse to grind the poet's bare toe with the heel of his sandal. He kicked the fellow's ankle, but the fool persisted. "I would assume all the blame for you, of course," he said, noisily chewing white meat. "It's a fine system, one which I was prepared to make available to you too, most eminent scholar. I'm sure you would have found it convenient. I have been given to understand that systems of logic and methodology must be devised and perfected before science advances, and my system of negotiable and transferable apologetics would have been of particular value to you, Thontadio." "Would have?" "Yes, it's a pity. Somebody stole my blue-headed goat." "I'm sorry, blue-headed goat?" "He had a bed as bald as Hannigan's, your brilliance, and blue as the tip of Brother Armbruster's nose. I meant to make you a present of the animal, but some dastard filched him before you came." The abbot clenched his teeth and held his heel poised over the poet's toe. Thontadio was frowning slightly, but he seemed determined to untangle the poet's obscure skein of meaning. "Do we need a blue-headed goat?" he asked his clerk. "I can see no pressing urgency about it, sir," said the clerk. But the need is obvious," said the poet. "They say you are writing equations that will one day remake the world. They say a new light is dawning. If there's to be light, then somebody will have to be blamed for the darkness that's past." "Ah, thence the goat." Thontadio glanced at the abbot. "A sickly jest. Is this the best he can do?" "You'll notice he's unemployed. But let us talk of something sensible." No, objected the poet. "You mistake my meaning, your brilliance. The goat is to be enshrined and honored, not blamed. Crown him with the crown of St. Leibowitz. Crown him with the crown St. Leibowitz sent you, and thank him for the light that's rising. Then you blame Leibowitz and drive him into the desert. That way you won't have to wear the second crown, the one with thorns. Responsibility, it's called." The poet's hostility had broken out into the open, and he was no longer trying to seem humorous. The Thon gazed at him icily. The abbot's heel wavered again over the poet's toe, and again had reluctant mercy on it. "And when," said the poet, "your patron's army comes to seize this abbey, the goat can be placed in the courtyard and taught to bleat, 'There's been nobody here but me, whenever a stranger comes by." One of the officers started up from his stool with an angry grunt, his hand reaching reflexively for his saber. He broke the hilt clear of the scabbard, and 6 inches of steel glistened a warning at the poet. The Thon seized his wrist and tried to force the blade back in the sheath, but it was like tugging at the arm of a marble statue. "A swordsman as well as a draftsman," taunted the poet, apparently unafraid of dying. "Your sketches of the abbey's defenses show such promise of artistic—" The officer barked an oath, and the blade leapt clean of the scabbard. His comrade seized him, however, before he could lunge. An astonished rumble came from the congregation as the startled monks came to their feet. The poet was still smiling blandly. "Artistic growth," he continued. "I predict that one day your drawing of the underwall tunnels will be hung in a museum of fine—" A dull chunk came from under the table. The poet paused in mid-bite, lowered the wishbone from his mouth, and turned slowly white. He munched, swallowed, and continued to lose color. He gazed abstractly upward. "You're grinding it off," he muttered out of the side of his mouth. "Through talking?" the abbot asked, and continued to grind. "I think I have a bone in my throat," the poet admitted. "You wish to be excused?" "I am afraid I must." A pity! We shall miss you. Paulo gave the toe one last grind for good measure. You may go, then. The poet exhaled gustily, blotted his mouth, and arose. He drained his wine cup and inverted it in the center of the tray. Something in his manner compelled them to watch him. He pulled down his eyelid with one thumb, bent his head over his cupped palm, and pressed. The eyeball popped out into his palm, bringing a choking sound from the Texarkanans, who were apparently unaware of the poet's artificial orb. "Watch him carefully," said the poet to the glass eye, and then deposited it on the upturned base of his wine cup, where it stared balefully at Don Taddeo. "Good evening, my lords," he said cheerfully to the group, and marched away. The angry officer muttered a curse and struggled to free himself from the grasp of his comrades. "Take him back to his quarters and sit on him till he cools off," the Thon told them, "and better see that he doesn't get a chance at that lunatic." "I'm mortified," he said to the abbot when the livid guardsman was hauled away. "They aren't my servants, and I can't give them orders, but I can promise you he will grovel for this, and if he refuses to apologize and leave immediately, he'll have to match that hasty sword against mine before noon tomorrow." "No bloodshed," begged the priest. "It was nothing. Let's all forget it." His hands were trembling, his countenance gray. "He will make apology and go," Don Taddeo insisted, "or I shall offer to kill him. And don't worry, he doesn't dare fight me, because if he won, Hannigan would have him impaled on the public stake while they forced his wife to. But never mind that. He'll grovel and go just the same. I'm deeply ashamed that such a thing could have come about. I should have thrown the poet out as soon as he showed up. He provoked the whole thing, and I failed to stop it. The provocation was clear." "Provocation? By the fanciful lie of a vagrant fool?" Josard reacted as if the poet's charges were true. "Then you don't know that they are preparing a comprehensive report on the military value of our abbey as a fortress?" The scholar's jaw fell. He stared from one priest to the other in apparent unbelief. "Can this be true?" he asked after a long silence. The abbot nodded. "And you've permitted us to stay?" "We keep no secrets. Your companions are welcome to make such a study if they wish. I would not presume to ask why they want the information. The poet's assumption, of course, was merest fantasy." "Of course," the Thon said weakly, not looking at his host. "Surely your prince has no aggressive ambitions in this region, as the poet hinted?" Surely not. And even if he did, I'm sure that he would have the wisdom, or at least the wise counselors to lead him, to understand that our abbey's value as a storehouse of ancient wisdom is many times greater than its value as a citadel." The Thon caught the note of pleading, the undercurrent of supplication for help in the priest's voice, and he seemed to brood on it, picking lightly at his food and saying nothing for a time. "We will speak of this matter again before I return to the Collegium," he promised quietly. A pall had fallen on the banquet, but it began to lift during the group singing in the courtyard after the meal, and it vanished entirely when the time came for the scholar's lecture in the great hall. Embarrassment seemed at an end, and the group had resumed a surface of cordiality. Don Paulo led the Thon to the lectern. Galt and the Don's clerk followed, joining them on the platform. Applause rang out heartily following the abbot's introduction of the Thon. The hush that followed suggested the silence of a courtroom awaiting a verdict. The scholar was no gifted orator, but the verdict proved satisfying to the monastic throng. "I have been amazed at what we've found here," he told them. "A few weeks ago I would not have believed Oh, I'm so sorry. A few weeks ago, I would not have did not believe that records such as you have in your memorabilia could still be surviving from the fall of the last mighty civilization. It is still hard to believe, but evidence forces us to adopt the hypothesis that the documents are authentic. Their survival here is incredible enough, but even more fantastic, to me, is the fact that they have gone unnoticed during this century until now. Lately, there have been men capable of appreciating their potential value, and not only myself, what Thon Cashler might have done with them while he was alive, even 70 years ago. The sea of monks' faces was alight with smiles upon hearing so favorable a reaction to the memorabilia from one so gifted as the Thon. Paulo wondered why they failed to sense the faint undercurrent of resentment, or was it suspicion, in the speaker's tone. "Had I known of these sources 10 years ago," he was saying, "much of my work in optics would have been unnecessary." "Aha," thought the abbot, "so that's it. Or at least part of it. He's finding out that some of his discoveries are only rediscoveries, and it leaves a bitter taste. But surely he must know that never during his lifetime can he be more than a recoverer of lost works. However brilliant, he can only do what others before him had done, and so it would be, inevitably, until the world became as highly developed as it had been before the flame deluge." Nevertheless, it was apparent that Thontario was impressed. "My time here is limited," he went on. "From what I have seen, I suspect it will take 20 specialists several decades to finish milking the memorabilia for understandable information. Physical science normally proceeds by inductive reasoning, tested by experiment, but here the task is deductive. From a few broken bits of general principles, we must attempt to grasp particulars. In some cases, it may prove impossible. For example..." He paused for a moment to produce a packet of notes and thumbed through them briefly. "Here is a quotation which I found buried downstairs. It's from a 4-page fragment of a book which may have been an advanced physics text. A few of you may have seen it. And if the space terms predominate in the expression for the interval between event points, the interval is said to be space-like, since it is then possible to select a coordinate system belonging to an observer with an admissible velocity in which the events appear simultaneous and therefore separated only spatially. If, however, the interval is time-like, the events cannot be simultaneous in any coordinate system, but there exists a coordinate system in which the space terms will vanish entirely, so that the separation between events will be purely temporal, id est occurring at the same place, but at different times. Now, upon examining the extremals of the real interval..." He looked up with a whimsical smile. "Has anyone here looked at that reference lately?" The sea of faces remained blank. "Anyone ever remember seeing it?" Kornhor and 2 others cautiously lifted their hands. "Anyone know what it means?" The hands quickly went down. The Thon chuckled. "It's followed by a page and a half of mathematics, which I won't try to read, but it treats some of our fundamental concepts as if they weren't basic at all, but evanescent appearances that change according to one's point of view. It ends with the word therefore, but the rest of the page is burnt, and the conclusion with it. The reasoning is impeccable, however, and the mathematics quite elegant, so that I can write the conclusion myself. It seems the conclusion of a madman. I began with assumptions, however, which appeared equally mad. Is it a hoax? If it isn't, what is its place in the whole scheme of the science of the ancients? What precedes it as a prerequisite to understanding? What follows, and how can it be tested? All questions I can't answer. This is only one example of the many enigmas posed by these papers you've kept so long. Reasoning which touches experimental reality nowhere is the business of angelologists and theologians, not of physical scientists. And yet such papers as these describe systems which touch our experience nowhere. Were they within the experimental reach of the ancients? Certain references tend to indicate it. One paper refers to elemental transmutation, which we just recently established as theoretically impossible. And then it says, experiment proves. But how? It may take generations to evaluate and understand some of these things. It is unfortunate that they must remain here, in this inaccessible place, for it will take a concentrated effort by numerous scholars to make meaning of them. I am sure you realize that your present facilities are inadequate, not to mention inaccessible to the rest of the world. Seated on the platform behind the speaker, the abbot began to glower, waiting for the worst. Thontadio chose, however, to offer no proposals, but his remarks continued to make clear his feeling that such relics belonged in more competent hands than those of the monks of the Albertian order of St. Leibowitz, and that the situation as it prevailed was absurd. Perhaps sensing the growing uneasiness in the room, he soon turned to the subject of his immediate studies, which involved a more thorough investigation into the nature of light than had been made previously. Several of the Abbey's treasures were proving to be of much help, and he hoped to devise soon an experimental means for testing his theories. After some discussion of the phenomenon of refraction, he paused, then said apologetically, "I hope none of this offends anybody's religious beliefs," and looked around quizzically. Seeing that their faces remained curious and bland, he continued for a time, then invited questions from the congregation. "Do you mind a question from the platform?" asked the abbot. "Not at all," said the scholar, looking a bit doubtful, as if thinking, et tu, Brute? "I was wondering what there is about the refrangible property of light that you thought might be offensive to religion." Well, the Thon paused uncomfortably. Monsignor Apollo, whom you know grew quite heated on the subject, he said that light could not possibly have been refrangible before the flood, because the rainbow was supposedly... The room burst into roaring laughter, drowning the rest of the remark. By the time the abbot had waved them to silence, Thontadio was beet red, and Don Paulo had some difficulty in maintaining his own solemn visage. "Monsignor Apollo is a good man, a good priest, but all men are apt to be incredible asses at times, especially outside their domains. I'm sorry I asked the question." "The answer relieves me," said the scholar. "I seek no quarrels." There were no further questions, and the Thon proceeded to his second topic, the growth and the present activities of his collegium. The picture, as he painted it, seemed encouraging. The collegium was flooded with applicants who wanted to study at the institute. The collegium was assuming an educational function as well as an investigative one. Interest in natural philosophy and science was on the increase among the literate laity. The institute was being liberally endowed, symptoms of revival and renaissance. "I might mention a few of the current researches and investigations being conducted by our people," he went on. "Following Brett's work on the behavior of gases, Thon Vich Mortorn is investigating the possibilities for the artificial production of ice. Thon Frieder Haub is seeking a practical means for transmitting messages by electrical variations along a wire." The list was long, and the monks appeared impressed. Studies in many fields, medicine, astronomy, geology, mathematics, mechanics, were all being undertaken. A few seemed impractical and ill-considered, but most seemed to promise rich reward in knowledge and practical application. From Jégin's research for the universal nostrum to Baudouc's reckless assault on orthodox geometries, the collegium's activities exhibited a healthy hankering to pry open nature's private files, locked since mankind had burned its institutional memories and condemned itself to cultural amnesia more than a millennium ago. In addition to these studies, Thon Mahoma is heading a project which seeks further information about the origin of the human species. Since this is primarily an archaeological task, he asked me to search your library for any suggestive material on the subject after I complete my own study here. However, perhaps I'd better not dwell on this at any length, since it's tending to cause controversy with the theologians. But if there are any questions... A young monk who was studying for the priesthood stood up and was recognized by the Thon. Sir, I was wondering if you were acquainted with the suggestions of St. Augustine on the subject. I am not. A 4th century bishop and philosopher, he suggested that in the beginning, God created all things in their germinal causes, including the physiology of man, and that the germinal causes inseminate, as it were, the formless matter, which then gradually evolved into the more complex shapes and eventually man. Has this hypothesis been considered? The Thon's smile was condescending, though he did not openly brand the proposal childish. I'm afraid it has not, but I shall look it up, he said in a tone that indicated he would not. Thank you, said the monk, and sat down meekly. Perhaps the most daring research of all, however, continued the sage, is being conducted by my friend Thon Esser Schon. I lost my spot somehow, even though I was just there. Is being conducted by my friend Thon Esser Schon. It is an attempt to synthesize living matter. Thon Esser hopes to create living protoplasm using only 6 basic ingredients. This work could lead to... Yes, you have a question? A monk in the 3rd row had risen and was bowing toward the speaker. The abbot leaned forward to peer at him and recognized with horror that it was Brother Armbruster, the librarian. If you would do an old man the kindness, croaked the monk, dragging out his words in a plodding monotone. This Thon Esser Schon, who limits himself to only 6 basic ingredients, is very interesting. I was wondering, are they permitting him to use both hands? The Thon paused and frowned. And may I also inquire, Armbruster's dry voice dragged on, whether this remarkable feat is to be performed from the sitting, standing, or prone position, or perhaps on horseback while playing 2 trumpets? The novices snickered audibly. The abbot came quickly to his feet. Brother Armbruster, you have been warned. You are excommunicated from the common table until you make satisfaction. You may wait in the Lady Chapel. The librarian bowed again and stole quietly out of the hall, his carriage humble, but his eyes triumphant. The abbot murmured apologetically to the scholar, but the Thon's glance was suddenly chilly. In conclusion, he said, a brief outline of what the world can expect, in my opinion, from the intellectual revolution that's just beginning. Eyes burning, he looked around at them, and his voice changed from casual to fervent rhythms. Ignorance has been our king. Since the death of empire, he sits unchallenged on the throne of man. His dynasty is age-old. His right to rule is now considered legitimate. Past sages have affirmed it. They did nothing to unseat him. Tomorrow, a new prince shall rule. Men of understanding, men of science shall stand behind his throne, and the empire shall encompass the earth. Oh, I skipped a line. I'm struggling today, folks. I'm so sorry. Men of understanding, men of science shall stand behind his throne, and the universe will come to know his might. His name is truth. His empire shall encompass the earth, and the mastery of man over the earth shall be renewed. A century from now, men will fly through the air in mechanical birds. Metal carriages will race along roads of man-made stone. There will be buildings of 30 stories, ships that go under the sea, machines to perform all works. And how will this come to pass? He paused and lowered his voice. In the same way, all changes come to pass, I fear, and I am sorry it is so. It will come to pass by violence and upheaval, by flame and by fury, for no change comes calmly over the world. He glanced around, for a soft murmur arose from the community. It will be so. We do not will it so. But why? Ignorance is king. Many would not profit by his abdication. Many enrich themselves by means of his dark monarchy. They are his court, and in his name they defraud and govern, enrich themselves, and perpetuate their power. Even literacy they fear, for the written word is another channel of communication that might cause their enemies to become united. Their weapons are keen-honed, and they use them with skill. They will press the battle upon the world when their interests are threatened, and the violence which follows will last until the structure of society as it now exists is leveled to rubble, and a new society emerges. I am sorry, but that is how I see it. The words brought a new pall over the room. Dom Paulo's hopes sank, for the prophecy gave form to the scholar's probable outlook. Thontario knew the military ambitions of his monarch. He had a choice: to approve of them, to disapprove of them, or to regard them as impersonal phenomena beyond his control, like a flood, famine, or whirlwind. Evidently, then, he accepted them as inevitable, to avoid having to make a moral judgment. Let there be blood, iron, and weeping. How could such a man thus evade his own conscience and disavow his responsibility, and so easily? The abbot stormed to himself. But then the words came back to him. For in those days the Lord God had suffered the wise men to know the means by which the world itself might be destroyed. He also suffered them to know how it might be saved, and as always let them choose for themselves. And perhaps they had chosen, as Thontario chooses, to wash their hands before the multitude. Look you to it, lest they themselves be crucified. And they had been crucified anyhow, without dignity, always, for anybody anyhow is to get nailed on it and hang on it, and if you drop off, they beat. There was sudden silence. The scholar had stopped talking. The abbot blinked around the hall. Half the community was staring toward the entrance. At first his eyes could make out nothing. "What is it?" he whispered to Galt. "An old man with a beard and shawl," hissed Galt. "It looks like—" "No, he wouldn't." Dom Paulo arose and moved to the front of the dais to stare at the faintly defined shape in the shadows. Then he called out to it softly, "Benjamin?" The figure stirred. It drew its shawl tighter about spindly shoulders and hobbled slowly into the light. It stopped again, muttering to itself as it looked around the room. Then its eyes found the scholar at the lectern. Leaning on a crooked staff, the old apparition hobbled slowly toward the lectern, never taking its eyes from the man who stood behind it. Thontario looked humorously perplexed at first, but when no one stirred or spoke, he seemed to lose color as the decrepit vision came near him. The face of the bearded antiquity blazed with hopeful ferocity of some compelling passion that burned more furiously in him than the life principle long since due to depart. He came close to the lectern, paused. His eyes twitched over the startled speaker. His mouth quivered. He smiled. He reached out one trembling hand toward the scholar. The Thon drew back with a snort of revulsion. The hermit was agile. He vaulted to the dais, dodged the lectern, and seized the scholar's arm. What madness! Benjamin needed the arm while he stared hopefully into the scholar's eyes. His face clouded. The glow died. He dropped the arm. A great keening sigh came from the dry old lungs as hope vanished. The eternally knowing smirk of the old Jew of the mountain returned to his face. He turned to the community, spread his hands, shrugged eloquently. "It's still not him," he told them sourly, then hobbled away. Afterwards, there was little formality. All right. That's the end of chapter 20. Thank you, as always, for hanging out. A lot of hiccups today. My apologies. I still haven't begun my sound editing education journey, if I'm being frank. Life. But I'm trying. I'll get there. And when I do, perhaps I'll start cleaning those up sometimes. We'll see. But anyway, thanks for hanging. And if you're listening later on YouTube, thanks for that too. As always, shout out to Aindulmedir. Go check him out. He's everywhere. YouTube, Bandcamp, Spotify. And we'll be back on Monday with more. In the meantime, I hope you all have a great weekend. And yeah, thanks for hanging out. Take it easy.